Creating dramatic and cinematic videos for your church is what this episode of Pro Church Tools is all about, as we're going to break down 7 eye-popping shot setups that you can copy and start using right away. And by the end of this video, you'll have a bag full of tricks that you can reach into next time you've got a camera in your hands.
Well, hey there, and welcome to Pro Church Tools. This is the show to help you share the message of Jesus while we navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I am your host, Alex Mills, joined as always by Brady Shearer.
We want to use this episode, Alex, to inspire the videographers and cinematographers in Pro Church Nation. Next time you take out your camera and you're trying to create a visually appealing, dynamic, fresh, not boring shot, what are you going to do? I have 7 specific composition shot setups that I use again and again when I have a camera in my hand or a drone controller in my hands. And so we want to walk through each individually with multiple examples and describe how to accomplish these, the time of day. And we're also going to compare how to accomplish these if all you did was shoot these shots in your church during a service. So all the examples, or most of the examples you're going to see, are like outdoor examples. But if you were just going to shoot this exact type of shot in your church's service, you could do the same thing. We'll describe those as well.
And if I may steal a little bit of thunder from the videographers and cinematographers out there, I have employed every single one of these tips and tactics as a photographer into still imagery. And so if you're shooting images of your pastor preaching, or people in the cafe before the service, or if you're shooting images outside for sermon graphic maybe, all of these apply to still images as well.
Shot setup number 1, I call this sunbeam at the edge of the frame.
One of my favorites.
So this is very simple. Basically, the sun is out. Time of day you want to shoot this is in golden hour, where the sun is low to the horizon. That's going to be the best time to accomplish this shot. And you frame your subject, you frame your shot in such a way where the sun is on the very edge of the right or left of the frame. And what this accomplishes is a number of different things. By getting that sunbeam on the edge, it obviously makes the shot a lot more dynamic because you're manufacturing a lens flare. Often the light on the edge of the frame can kind of shiny with these like pointy rays.
Yeah, like dances almost sometimes.
That's a creative way of saying it. I'm saying pointy rays. Yeah, just dancing like the poetry of the shot. And then it can create a flare on the opposite side of the frame. And it also looks like a light leak.
Yes.
Like one of those old vintage lenses.
Yeah, like those filters
kind of
we used
broken.
to use on Instagram.
Yeah, you download like authentic light leaks. You just like add it in Premiere. Every film photographer is
or light leak transitions.
Oh, that was a good one as well. So you're kind of like manufacturing one of those. Sometimes also if you're moving the camera, that edge light beam will kind of wash the entire frame in like a pinkish hue or a bluish hue. If you're going to do this in your church, what you want to do is basically take one of those LED lights that you've got going on and position it where it's just kind of creeping into the edge of the frame. Maybe it's blue, maybe it's pink, maybe it's green, and it's going to give a really cool look to the overall clip.
Yeah, and a few technical tips, especially if you are outside and trying to do this with the sun, like some of these examples that you're seeing on the screen are. If you've ever seen one of those photos or videos where the sun has these really like defined pointy rays, as you would say, the way to accomplish that, so if you had your aperture blade stopped all the way down, so like 1.4, let's say, you could get some very cool sun flares, but it's going to be very like washed.
Okay.
But if you crank up that aperture to like 11, 13, 15, that's when you start to see those rays get really defined. Yeah.
Really?
So it kind of depends on what kind of look you're trying to accomplish. And then also, if you're outside, or even this is going to work with those LED lights again as well. If you kind of frame up that shot and get that light where you want it, if you just kind of tilt your camera around, you're going to see that light bounce off your aperture blades in totally different ways. So you have like just by the most minuscule tilt of the wrist, you could get some really drastically different shapes and textures and lights even after you've got your framing set. So have fun with this and play around. It's one of my favorite things to do, to play with these kind of light sources, especially if you're in church and you're filming your pastor or the worship and you've got a black background. And let's say you're using the rule of thirds and you've positioned your subject off to the left third. On the right, if you throw some light in there, it's all black. But if you throw that you frame that LED light just on the side, you're gonna get like that pop of color, that pop of interest, of intrigue. And all you had to do is frame your shot differently. So this is definitely one of my favorite things to employ when I'm shooting just about anything.
Shot setup number 2, same time of day, golden hour. Here what you're gonna do is instead of positioning the sun or your light source to the edge of the frame, you're gonna use an object within your frame to block out that light source. And you're gonna create a really golden or like just really bursting with color silhouette where that light source is trying to get through that object. And then what you can do is you can move your body or move the camera in such a way where you reveal that light source and then suddenly you get the light beam, the light leak, the lens flare across the screen in a beautiful, beautiful way. In this example here, we're doing that with a cross. And this scene was like not set up in like it looks cool here, but we were there. Basically, we just took a cross, we put it in some cinder blocks in like this barren field. It was next to like some like manufacturing plants. Like it wasn't exactly beautiful, but we waited for the right time of day. And with this shot, the sun is right behind that center beam of the cross. And as I move my body and the camera, the beam gets blocked by the cross and then it like exposes and it comes out and there's that beautiful dramatic flare.
You could do the same thing if you're shooting in church, especially in a worship service. If you've got people's hands raised in music and you've got some LEDs up at the stage that are shooting out, you can position yourself behind that hand and shoot towards that hand and use the hand to block out the light. And we've done this in church settings as well, where you'll get these really cool like rays of light almost shining through the fingers and illuminating the hand. So you can get really creative with this. Obviously, you wouldn't really want to do this with a subject that's a person. So you wouldn't really want to put the light behind your pastor, because then your pastor is going to be silhouetted and you're trying to do something really artistic when we just want to see your pastor's face. And so use this one sparingly and thoughtfully, but you can get some really great results.
Shot setup number 3 is the background foreground shot setup, where there's an element in the foreground of your frame, but there's also the main element in the background. So in this first example, for those that are listening, basically we have the skyline of Toronto. So skyline, big metropolitan city. We're like looking at it from across a lake. And so if we were going to add any movement with maybe a camera on a slider, even physical movement, moving laterally, it wouldn't be evident in the video because our subject is so far away.
Yeah.
So what do we do to compensate for that? We add a foreground element within the frame. So here, there was a fence in front of the lake so people don't fall in, and we used the top rail on that fence as the foreground element, and as we move the camera pretty close to that, upper rail on the fence, it looks like the whole image is moving. It's not. We're very far away, and that movement would not be evident at all to the CN Tower in the center of the frame, but because that foreground element is there, it works really well. We did this in that same scene where we set up that cross in the cinder blocks. There was a lot of like high grass around there, and we used that high grass to create depth in the shot. So there's a couple of things that you're accomplishing with the background foreground element shot setup. One, you're manufacturing movement in a scene where movement may or may not exist otherwise, but you're also creating depth. And anytime you can create depth, shallow depth of field, you get a more rich looking image overall. You can do this any time of day.
Yeah, we have to do this all the time when we're shooting aerial clips, especially, I'm thinking about sometime we were in Iceland and you're filming like the biggest, most majestic mountain you've ever seen, flying 1,000,000 miles an hour at 1,000,000 miles in the sky.
Definitely keeping within regulations.
Yeah,
always.
And it's like, why does it look like we're just parked in the sky, like not moving? And so sometimes you have to get creative and find a tree or another mountain peak to put in that foreground to show like, oh no, we're moving pretty quick here, and to show the scale of that background element, which is, what you're trying to exaggerate, the scale of this mountain, or in this case, the cityscape of Toronto.
We've done this in service where I'm taking a video of a keyboard player and I'll put the focus on their hands, but I'll like stoop down to like the level of their hands, the level of the keys themselves, and the foreground element will be the edge of the keyboard, which takes like a pretty static shot of someone just like playing keys, and it manufactures a lot more depth in the frame.
So good.
Shot setup number 4, wide angle lens facing up with movement. You've seen we've given very creative names to all of these. Quite
We wanted
technical.
it to be explicitly clear what this shot is.
And I have gotten carried away in the past with like overly poetic names with the tap, tap, taparoo strategy.
Nice, yeah.
I didn't go that direction.
The wide angle
this
facing
time.
up with movement. That says it all. Next.
So, yeah, at least the setup is easy. If you remember this name, you won't forget how to achieve the shot. You need a wide angle lens on the camera. The reason for that is that wide angle lenses dramatically increase the perceived, they dramatically increase the compression of the shot, which increases the perceived like
field of view,
size, bigness.
Yeah.
It increases the bigness,
Yes.
really. And so this is great when you are facing upwards because it dramatically exaggerates what you're looking at. And when you can compound that with some type of movement, you can get a really cool look. Like, imagine you're standing in the middle of a forest and you're facing straight up, kind of gazing at the sky, this really majestic view. Well, you can accomplish that in a number of different ways. Obviously, you need the wide angle lens. It's helpful if you have your camera pointed straight up on a gimbal because then it's going to be super smooth. But you can also do it. We've done this in a car, hanging out the sunroof of a car, hanging out the window of a car, hanging out the rear part of a car, the trunky part.
Yeah, all the parts.
You can also do this, though, with a wide angle lens on a camera with ideally an image stabilized sensor.
Yeah.
In slow-mo, like a high frame rate of like 60 or 96, with your elbows locked in, walking very slowly, and then using warp stabilizer in post.
True.
And I know this because I've done it when I didn't have a gimbal readily available.
When I used to do live concert photography, this is one of my favorite ways to shoot bands. And so you can definitely do this in church as well. If you've got a big stage, you got some lights, you got some guy just like ripping the most gnarly guitar solo of all time, and he's standing kind of close to the front of the stage. If you're at ground level and the stage is here, and you've got a big wide lens, and you kind of sweep that shot along his feet, everything about that guy is going to look so much more epic. Everyone's going to get saved by the guitar solo. And so have fun with this one. I think the example clip that we showed here was in Yosemite National Park. Yeah. And so we just had, the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K on the Ronin S and really had some fun just basically walking around Yosemite because we weren't allowed to fly there. So we're still able to shoot the trees, still able to shoot the mountains, just with a different tactic.
Shot setup number 5, the blue hour silhouette. And to accomplish this, you need to shoot during blue hour, which is basically dawn and dusk. You've only got about 10 to 15 minutes to accomplish this because the light is very fleeting. You need the light to be enough where you get the rich color of this clear blank canvas. And that's why you want to shoot with like almost no clouds in the sky so that you can get these rich pinks and these rich oranges and reds in the sky. But you can't shoot so late that like the sky doesn't have any color.
It has to be illuminated somehow.
But if it's too illuminated, then you won't be able to create the silhouette.
It's a very slim window.
Exactly. But when you can find that window of time on the right time of day, you can get some really cool shots. So in this example clip, we have Jake Goslin from Churchfront as our model, actually. It's that same scene where we just set up a cross in the middle of nowhere. It was raining in the morning. We went back in the afternoon, and there was this really clear sky. The sunset was beautiful. It's blue. It's pinky. It's orange. The cross is a silhouette. And then we had Jake raise his hands in the sky in worship, and then his hands become a silhouette as well. And it's this really beautiful shot. But again, you got to find that perfect time of day, and you need that clear canvas in the background.
What we'll often do if we're trying to shoot in blue hour is like start before blue hour and start shooting, film through blue hour, and then film past blue hour, and then import that footage and be like, okay, where did we nail it? Like, we're going to throw out some of those clips because it wasn't quite it. I'm thinking about one scene we filmed. It was a baptism scene. And we filmed, and the sunset was like a little bit underwhelming that night. And then all of a sudden, it just happened. And we had like 2 minutes of just glory, basically. And so some of those clips that we shot before, it's like, we need to reshoot those right now because this is it. This is that moment. So it's going to be hit or miss, but if you get there for it, you're going to find it, and the results, they're incredible.
Shot setup number 6, we call this small people, big canvas.
I think this example clip is actually from that scene, the baptism scene.
Yeah, I think, yes, it actually absolutely is. So there's you and there's Ryland, and you are baptizing Ryland in the lake, in Lake Ontario. And I'm basically standing on the beach, and you guys are maybe, 50 meters what is that, like 50
150 feet.
yards, whatever, 50 yards
We're
from
out there.
my camera.
Yeah.
And so you two look really small in this vast expanse that is this massive body of water of Lake Ontario. And the visual appeal from this shot setup comes from the extreme sides of two spectrums, or of one spectrum paired together. So it's this huge, massive landscape canvas, and then there's these two tiny little people in this. We did this in the Swiss Alps. Brandon was standing at a mountaintop, and there's this huge like landscape of all these mountains in the Alps, and there's a tiny little Brandon in the middle, and the drone is kind of sweeping around him in a circular motion, so it's focusing on him, and there's this great dynamic of really small person, really big canvas.
This is a great tactic to draw attention to your subject, right? Like if you're seeing this lake clip right now, you can't help, your eyes are taken right to the subject because there's this huge, almost blank canvas, and it's very clear what the subject is. Now you should be mindful that so for example, this shot where you're, let's say 50 meters away from us, maybe shooting on a 35 millimeter lens, you cannot nail this shot at a shallow depth of field. If you're shooting at 1.4, 100 feet away, it's almost impossible to really dial in that focus. So you're gonna have to sacrifice that shallow depth of field, crank that aperture up a little bit, and to really ensure that that plane of focus is where it needs to be because we're so far away.
Absolutely. And then the final shot setup, we call this the color block. And I learned this from you, at least in photography. So I'll let you explain it.
This is one of my favorite things to do. If I'm shooting, I used to do this in video as well too, but like if I'm shooting portraits and we're shooting outside, I will always like look around for some foliage and like just grab some, like grab a leaf or grab a flower, and I'll hold it, if this is my lens right here, I'll hold it right in front of the lens really close. So it's out of focus. You cannot tell what it is. It almost looks like I splashed some color on in post. But the color, because I took the foliage from the scene we're in, ties it all together.
It's not some random color.
Right, and it also like draws your eyes towards the subject again. The other week, I needed to splash some white in a photo. So what I did was I had my lens, I took a Kleenex, I wrapped it around my lens, took an elastic and just mounted on the lens. So I didn't even have to hold it. The Kleenex was just kind of like hanging here and like this white elements to it.
Like a halo.
Yeah, and so in video, you're gonna be able to do this outside. You're seeing an example right now of a scene we shot of like some plants growing to illustrate, like seeds growing into sprouting. And so we had some plants, and so what we did, you shot this clip, I believe, is you framed it so one of these plants was so close to the lens and out of focus, and the other plant was on the other third of the frame and in focus. And so you get that consistent color, that splash of color that, like I said, almost looks artificial. It almost looks like it was in post, but it's not. You're just using the elements that are around you. You can totally do this in your service. It may not work as well with color, especially if your church has the lights down for service, but you can use people to act like a block and kind of add like a black element to the screen. It's out of focus, it's fuzzy, and it draws your attention to the subject. So you're gonna be able to, if you start trying to do this, you're gonna find opportunities to do it everywhere.
And that's the same with all of these. Once you know them and you can start identifying them, you'll be able to see them in the world around you as you're beginning to shoot. So 7 shot setups for no more boring clips in your church videos. Try them out. Let us know how you like them. And that'll do it for this episode of Pro Church Tools. We'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching this video. We recorded these in advance because we're actually in Scotland, traveling right now, eating bangers and mash. Would you bang that subscribe button?
And would you mash that like button?